Hey everyone, and welcome back to the show. I'm Blake Oliver.
And I'm David Leary.
Our guest today is Cody Turley. Cody is a certified public accountant and a certified fraud examiner. He is currently a staff accountant at the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission's Atlanta regional office. Prior to this role, he served as the chief accountant of enforcement at the Arizona Corporation Commission, where he led a team of forensic accountants investigating securities law violations. Cody's experience also includes working as a forensic accounting associate at Ancura and interning at the SEC during his college years. Welcome to the show, Cody.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
It's so great to have you. And the reason you're on the show is because we had an email back and forth. You were listening to one of the episodes where we talked about going Big Four versus going industry when you come out of school. And you said it's not fair to compare Big Four to going into industry in general because you've got to compare Big Four to top companies. Could you elaborate more on that?
Yeah, so I think one of the benefits of going into Big Four, I don't want to say that that's not a good career path or good career choice, but it shows that you, one, are competitive in getting a job at a prestigious company that's well known and produces great work. And then it also shows that you have a deep accounting knowledge and that you've been in a place where that's been able to develop. But I kind of really dislike the idea that that's the only place that you can do that. I didn't do that. I went to the SEC in an internship and then just started going in a mid-sized consulting firm and just had my career go exactly where I want it to go since then. I also think that, if you went and worked for Ford, I think I used the example, or Microsoft, or any big Fortune 100 company, that's going to show the same thing if you get in their audit group, or not their audit group, but one of their accounting groups, just any one of them really that you're interested in. And I think you're going to get that same resume bump from the name of the company. I think you're going to get the experience you need to develop your skills. And I think you can find that a lot more places than just the Big Four.
So you said you interned with SEC.
Yeah.
How did that happen? Because there's so much noise on campus of Big Four, big accounting, and they're buying people Chick-fil-A and pizza parties. Like, how did they reach you or bubble up through all that noise?
So I really liked the show Suits, about attorneys, just being super shady. And at one point they get in trouble with the SEC. And that just kind of piqued my mind about, oh, like I'm interested in forensics. I should go and look at what that is. And I just applied online and I got a call back. And that's it. That's how I got that internship. I did a single interview and they're like, at the end of the interview, they're like, come intern with us.
That's great. So you're at the SEC again after interning and then going elsewhere. You're back. What's your job there at the SEC?
Yeah, so I get to make auditors' lives worse. No, so at the SEC, we regulate public companies, and that includes the auditors that do it. And we also regulate just investments in general. And so a lot of my work is dealing with what we call offering frauds, which are when they sold the investment at the beginning, there was some sort of fraud. That means like Ponzi schemes, they're not telling you it's a Ponzi scheme. That's an offering fraud. So we're investigating Ponzi schemes. I'm doing the asset tracing, finding where the money goes. And then I'm looking at financial statements, audited financial statements, finding errors in them or getting tips from the public that, hey, something looks wrong here. And then we'll dig into that deeper. We'll call the auditor, we'll call the company, send subpoenas out, and just get them in for interviews and start looking at paperwork.
How did your internship at the SEC open doors for you?
Yeah. So if you ever get a call from the SEC as an auditor, you're going to respond, right? And so getting that internship at the SEC, that's just a name that the Big Four recognizes, that big audit firms, accounting firms, any accounting professional that's worked at a high level is going to recognize. And it also just showed I had the accounting skill set needed to, review the work of the big audit firms, of the big accounting firms. And so just everywhere I applied to, even now, I still get asked about my internship, where I've had, multiple jobs on my resume, and that was my first internship in college.
Is that intimidating at all here you are. You seem fairly young to
Yeah,
me.
I'm 29.
Um, you're 29, and you're reviewing the work of the biggest professional services firms in the world, doing billions and billions of dollars of revenue. I would find that a bit intimidating. Like, how do you get over that hurdle?
Yeah, it's it's one of those things. You know how they talk about, like, your parents always say, oh, and a wild animal's just as afraid of you as you are of it.
Yeah.
That's kind of the situation you're in when you're talking with the auditors. Like,
Oh, I
you
got
know,
it.
I, I don't have like I'm talking to partners, obviously, regardless of where I'm at currently, like they're gonna have a really good handle on GAAP. They're gonna have a really good handle on the audit that they've done. They're gonna know more about the company. And I just have to recognize, I don't have to be better than them at this instance. I just need to know what they know and get their information. And so it's really just you look at the whole thing as a learning process and don't worry about what really is going on, I guess.
How's the work environment at the SEC? It looks like you are coming to us from home. I take it that's
Yeah,
not your
no, this
office.
is not my office.
So, do you get to work remotely? Is it a hybrid thing?
So it is 2 days in the office, a pay period is required, um, which means once a week, essentially, on average. And yeah, it's really flexible. It's really great. You have a ton of support from your teammates and your supervisors, all the way up to the national level. Like the DC office is super supportive of us, even out here in Atlanta, in one of the mid-sized offices. I'm able to work from home with no complaints from my supervisors most of the time, and move my schedule around as necessary. It's really supportive.
How are the hours?
Beat me to it.
So on the rare occasion I have to go over 40 hours, um, we get leave for every hour we work over that. So I
So
just
you
get,
work a couple extra hours and then you get to take that as paid time off
yeah,
later? Yeah,
yep,
seems fair.
yeah.
How much PTO do you get every year?
Um, 6 hours. Well, I don't know about a year, but it's 6 hours pay period, I think. So
So six every
whatever that
two
is.
weeks?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I'd have to do the math in my head, which I have learned not to do on this show because I'm inevitably wrong and it's very
Yeah. So that's
embarrassing. So,
like
um,
120-ish hours. Yeah.
cool.
So, what type of work did you do when you were interning for the SEC? I'm sure you had friends that were doing boring audit work, reconciling bank statements when they were doing their internships. What were you bragging about at the time?
Yeah. So I was working in one of their offices that it was the Office of Market Intelligence, and they just kind of review everything that comes in. So, the tips, the complaints, referrals from other agencies, and they just kind of look at them and say, is this something we want to investigate? And two, you know, does it actually look like a crime? And is it worth us investigating, or should we refer it out to someone else? And so I just got to look at all these complaints in there. I was in the accounting group, obviously, and I just looked at complaints against, everything from the top companies in the country to random little frauds happening on the street. And I just looked at it and said, did a little bit of research, said, yep, this looks like something we should investigate, and handed it down.
So you've had a bit of you've had an opportunity to work in forensic accounting in your career as well. What was that like leading a forensic accounting team in your 20s? I mean,
Yeah.
what were you doing?
So this was at the Arizona Corporation Commission. They're the securities regulator for the state of Arizona as well. So it's very similar work, but centered in the fraud and investigations are centered in Arizona. And it was the same sort of thing, just, going after on a much smaller scale. It was going after like the street criminals of white collar, ripping off people's retirement funds, grandparents, some fairly large Ponzi schemes too, and just making sure that the companies that were accused of doing something wrong, sometimes they weren't, but then we would just go in and dig through and make sure everything was right. And leading that team was really rewarding. I had everyone that I led was older than me, which I remember on one of your podcasts a while ago talking about older individuals getting in accounting. It's just sometimes a struggle, but I found it as a young person extremely rewarding to supervise people well older than me. They had a lot more, business experience. Some of them had a lot more years of forensic accounting, and just to learn from them, but then also learn how to use them properly was great.
So you've mentioned Ponzi schemes now, like multiple times. Are there just still a lot of Ponzi schemes going on in this country?
Oh, all the time, all the time. You can just Google Ponzi scheme and SEC, and like five companies we've just charged will come up. It's it's really sad, but it happens consistently because people see these big numbers and they think they can get, a 10% return in a month. And if they just keep rolling it over, that's their retirement in a year. They're done investing. And it happens all the time. It's really sad. And it's also surprisingly hard to pull some of the victims out and convince them that, yes, you are a victim. You need to work with us.
Mm, right, because the further in you are, the harder it is to admit that you made a terrible mistake. And
And
that's a huge, yeah.
that's a huge mental barrier for them. And then, con artists are very good at their job. That's another thing. It's like you have to realize that it's these people's jobs, and you don't get a big Ponzi scheme unless you're good at conning people. And they're good at making it seem feasible, seem real, seem like it can actually exist. And there are a lot of auditors that will help them do that too.
Mhm.
So,
So, what's obviously you've managed to grow some people skills and management skills. Did you also have to grow other skills to be good at forensic accounting like this? Like, do you have to do you have a little criminal in you? I guess maybe is a better question.
yeah, so it helps. Like, this is a very personal thing, but it helps for me that I have ADD because I go to court and testify, and I think as I'm looking at my work, I'm like, what if the attorney asked this? And then what if they asked this? And then what if they asked this? And then what if they asked this? And just keep going down these random little paths that my mind takes me on really helps me prepare for testimony in a courtroom, because I just overthought and thought about every little thing that the attorney might ask me. And then, yeah, working with people with big egos is also a very good thing to become a forensic accountant, because the stereotypes about attorneys are often true. Like, very prideful, well-educated, smart people that just think they're the greatest thing.
And you have to stick to your guns, right? You have to, when you know you found something that's not right, you can't let them use their charisma like those
Yeah,
Ponzi scheme people, right? You can't let them roll over you.
no, and it's also really important to be able to tell that to the attorneys that are on your side too. You talk about an audit, how it's sometimes difficult to go to the company and say, hey, we found this thing that looks wrong, because you've worked with them for a while. It's difficult to have that sort of confrontation, and it affects your job and your work life. But as an accountant working with attorneys, I have to go to these attorneys and say, hey, this thing you thought and this thing you've worked on writing up filing and paper over already, it's not right. We've got to start from scratch, or we've got to rework it, or we're not going to be able to prove this fraud. And so just being able to not only stick to your guns with opposing counsel, but with your own counsel is sometimes a bigger deal.
So you're working very closely then with the legal counsel, the lawyers at the SEC on
Yes.
these cases.
Yeah. So it's just us, me and them on our cases, going and doing the entire investigation, talking to victims, talking to company insiders, and it's great. It's really good to have that kind of difference in skill set. I really appreciate that.
Do
It
you
sounds.
have sorry, go ahead, David.
I was gonna say, it sounds like this is very tedious work, right? Like it needs individualized attention. It doesn't scale well. Just like, can you speak to the SEC? Are they overwhelmed and just behind by decades or years in the same way like the IRS is, right? They're just behind. They can't catch up. Like, where's the SEC in that?
Yeah, I don't want to get into that too much, but we obviously are allocating our resources as we see fit, but we have great partners all over the country. Not every crime has to be investigated by the SEC. There's other federal agencies. There's other state agencies. Like I worked at in Arizona. So yeah, like it's not something that I feel particularly overwhelmed with, but there's always more fraud.
How long does a typical case take from when you open the file to when you close it?
There's no it there's no set standard. Like there's no way I could give you a number. Like it can be a couple weeks to decades. Well, not
Wow.
decades, but years.
Years and years, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, that's the ones we tend to hear about, right? The really big ones that take years to prosecute.
Yeah.
Um,
But I mean, you
so,
can look at FTX, which that imploded fairly recently, and
mhm.
um, the criminal side, they've already got him going to jail. So
So how often are you going to court with the attorneys and providing testimony and getting on the stand?
um, probably once a year on
Okay,
average. Yeah. So it just kind of depends on how your cases end up. A lot of them will settle, some of them will not, and go to court. So yeah,
got it. So it's like getting all of the casework together, like putting together the case is basically what you're
yeah,
spending most of your time on.
yeah. That's the vast majority of time.
Yeah.
It's like I don't know, stapling the audit letter or audit report to the front of the financial statements is testifying for me. That's the very last thing that happens at the very end.
Well, Cody, it's been great talking to you. Like this is
Yeah,
fascinating. It's sort of an area of accounting that I never really met anyone, who works at the SEC and does this. So thank you for sharing this with me and our listeners and with David.
yeah.
Do you have any advice for listeners who are students or perhaps young professionals who are interested in getting a government role like what you do?
Yeah, apply online. Like that's the government has much different hiring procedures, like even at a state level, than the Big Four, or any accounting firm or any agency or company. That's much more about sometimes who you know or just getting in the door. But if you apply online, you're much more likely to get a call back if you're actually qualified, if you actually make it through the initial HR review. That's how I've gotten, all of my government positions. And then government work too, you work in much smaller teams, which means you get to do a lot more, a lot quicker. So when I started at the Arizona Corporation Commission, I was only had a year of college or a year of experience outside of college, which after that, after I started there, my boss basically handed me a case and said, "Hey, I want you to testify on this next month." So less than a year of experience, or a year of experience, and I'm testifying, which just doesn't happen at firms. Like one of my managers at a firm I interned with, he was just doing depositions, which is just where the opposing attorney talks to you after like 8 years of work. My boss at the big consulting firm, they hadn't testified and they were like 10 years into it. And it's not like the kind of pyramid base that accounting firms are at, where the lower level does all the grunt work and then it just gets a little bit better as you move up. I do everything from inputting stuff into Excel to analyzing it to testifying on it. And so if you can get into government, you're going to get exposed to a lot bigger stuff a lot quicker. But then you're just stuck doing the worst stuff longer too.
Cody, where do you see your career track headed towards? Obviously, if you were a Big Four, you're heading towards partner, but where's your career headed?
Um, I think I can keep moving up in government and just, I might have to change agencies or, go back to state and find a career at a higher level manager career in one of the state agencies. But honestly, I think if I really wanted to, I could go and become a partner, in a few years or just jump into Big Four if I wanted to get that experience. And so, because you see a lot of people jump back between government and public accounting or private practice fairly regularly. I've just kind of stuck with government, but I don't see there being any barriers to me jumping in.
Yep. And then you'd have totally gone the total backdoor route
Yeah,
to make
and
partner. I
I've
love that.
received offers from I guess the biggest company I've received an offer from was Disney at one point to run or to be on one of their internal investigation teams. And so it's not like I'm stuck at government. I've seen a lot of my coworkers go to internal audit because, it's the same sort of thing. You're just digging through the documents looking for problems.
Yeah, that's the great. You have so many career opportunities. You could go back to public accounting. You could do internal audit at a big corporation, be the chief internal auditor or whatnot.
Yeah.
So
Or I could just stay here. Like it's not.
Yeah.
I'm doing like it's great. I can't say I don't like working in government, or else I would have moved out of it. So,
Cody, thanks so much for joining us and sharing your career path with us. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I really appreciate being able to talk to you guys and just, again, Big Four is not the only option out there. Figure out what you want to do and just kind of go and do that.